and go up into these lakes, and you take that clear water, that settled out water, and we fill up big trash cans full of it and bring it back to the camp. That's how we got our fresh water, which was, I mean, though we had the delta going by, that wasn't what we drank from. It was just too sedimenty and a lot of dead fish in it. So take a look at that. You can see Alice cutting the fish. This is the size of the fillets we're doing. We cut these, prepare them for smoking, put them in the smokehouse, put them in the sun, and you have 24 hours of sun. So you hang your fish up in the sun, and 48 hours later, it's completely ready to go. And that's why you have to. This time of year you have to work. We work 23 hours a day because you would just work, sleep for an hour, wake up, eat fish, drink coffee, do this, blah blah. And on some days we're eating like fresh fish, and fresh caribou, all this stuff. And we go, I feel like rabbits. Let's get some rabbit. Okay, we'll go to the rabbit. But then one day it's raining, and John, her husband, was like, "Hey, buddy, you must be missing, good food." And I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of eating pretty well here, eating all this fish all the time." Pulls out a can of Spam. That's called Click. Click it's like Spam. It's a different manufacturer. It's the Arctic. Still has keys. You have to open it. You use a little key to turn. And he says, "Here, eat this. This is like a special treat." I wasn't really eating meat then, but I was eating their meat because it was fresh and it wasn't like full of chemicals and stuff. And he tells me, "Well, it's for you, fresh one. Eat it. We don't even cook it. You smear it on your bread." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this sounds terrible." But it really spoke to the two sides of life up there. And these are people who have had a traditional culture that lived off of the resources of the Delta for a long time. And then when the fur trade showed up and the whale oil trade showed up, you had the trading system developed where you could trade fish or furs for things like Spam. Which was like a great thing to do, or coffee, or tea. These were things that were like the big red rose tea and Spam. They are Click. Those are the, you are in camp. You're a good host and you can offer all your guests red rose tea and Click. And this is what they would eat in town too. And a lot of it came out of this, it was a status, it was a southern food, white food, but also it was because for a long time they were told this is better for you. This is better than fish. And then you had sort of bad science in the 90s and 80s that said, oh, fish are bad for you because they have these poisons in them, heavy metals, without any testing. So you have a whole history in this village, which is primarily First Nations communities. So the people I lived with people who are much similar to the Native Americans we would know down here. There are this group of people who made a migration a long time ago down to South America and came back up, and they repopulated the plains and into Canada. And they were living side by side with people who were the Inuit. They're more recent migrations across from Russia. So the very Mongolian features.
What native cultures is lady from?
The Gwich'in.
Gwich'in?
Yeah. So there's always been cultural conflict there, and for a long time the whites treat them as though, we treat them as though they were the same peoples. And that caused a lot of conflict, and this place is recovering from that. I mean, I knew her daughter well, she was in her 40s. She was a homeless crack addict in a town in the Arctic. I mean, this is the kind of place where you could go out in the tundra, live traditionally, and then come back to town and deal with this. And in the place where, at the bar in town, an off-duty police officer would shoot someone over, at 3 a.m. over an ex-girlfriend or something. I mean, this is like way out there. And but then you go to a place like this and they say, "Come sleep for free." And 2 days later, what's your name, buddy? So there's an amazing amount of trust. It was an incredible place to be in. And by the end of it, I was there for about 2 months. My head just hurt because I hadn't slept because it's been sunny for 2 months. And I was ready to move on because it was starting to snow and I wasn't really prepared for that. So I headed down south, and you can see Alice again. This is that midsummer, which is about 2 weeks, when the bugs cover everything, mosquitoes. But we're out, drying fish here on the Delta. So back in town again about food. In town, there's been this push recently by groups that 10 years ago didn't exist, because 10 years ago the Southern government was trying to teach still. They're trying to impose Southern rules on people, like how to behave, how you should be a good white person, a good Catholic. It's mostly a Catholic missionary up there. But there's groups now that are working to get food back into people's diet, like real food back into people's diet. Say, eat traditional food, but then augment it with things like vegetables, which in the Arctic are hard to grow and hard to get. There's a guy who drives his truck with fruit from Vancouver every 3 weeks to get some fresh stuff, and that's 3 weeks sitting in a refrigerated truck, so that's the freshest you can get, and it's like $10 for a couple of carrots. So these people took it to a hockey rink, made it into a garden, and they grow such big stuff because you have 24 hours a day, like for 3 months in the summer. So you can see there's an effort up there to change some of the damage done in the last 80, 90 years by what amounts to like colonization and cultural assimilation. And again, this is the tundra where I was saying, everything is this big, the entire tundra. And you can see across it, there's these little rolling hills. These are the little trees, you see, these things are birch trees that are this big. They're the same exact birch tree we have down here, but they only get this big. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So you can see now. So then I left. And the way I left, I'd flown up there thinking this was like remote, hard to get to. Well, there was a road that goes from this town to the Yukon, southern Yukon. And it was there, and I also knew that if you got a hitchhike on it, if you got a hitch, no one would get rid of you because it was 900 miles through nothing. There was one town in the middle, and no one would get rid of you. So I got a hitchhike in town and spent 3 days heading down through, like I said, it was snowing in Nubik. So it meant that autumn had come. It was like end of August. Autumn had come to the tundra. And all the little tiny plants were changing colors, and it was just amazing. And this is just moving down to this kind of scenery for 3 days.
Where's that in Alaska?
No, this is in Canada. This is in the Yukon. It's called Tombstone. This is in Tombstone National Forest in Canada. But you can see the valleys where it was like driving through these big watercolors. So I left this place, and I got down to southern Canada, had a flight to Europe, my next delta. I was moving from Mackenzie, taking this initial summer of experiences with me to Europe. But I had like 2 weeks to kill, so I ended up going to visit 2 friends out on Vancouver Island, where I didn't know that well, but I knew they had a little farm, and I'd go out and say hi. Well, I stayed there for like 3 weeks, farming every day, on the beach, with whales, in the U.S. in the distance every day, because you can see the mountains of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. So that summer, I really hadn't seen a lot of people. I had been around some of the same people all summer. I'd been out in the wilderness. And it was really neat. I was in Las Vegas before I started the Watson. I was living in Vegas doing some biological field work. So I felt like I got to the Arctic and got sort of renewed around like the wild. Even though I was completely angry with the way we had treated the native peoples, I was just shocked by the fact that the summer I was there, I met 3 people, 3 different sailboat crews that had sailed through the Arctic in a normal sailboat. The kind of sailboat we could sail down here. There's no ice in the summer. There's no more ice. 5 years ago, you couldn't bring an icebreaker through. Now there's no ice. The permafrost that we're on is fundamental. I mean, there were places where we would watch methane gas bubble out of the ground. So this gas that they were mining, you had to drill for before. Now the ice is melting, it bubbles out of the ground. So you're standing watching these gases that are more of a contributor to climate change than carbon dioxide coming out of the ground in like the kind of bubbles where you just stand back and you don't get splattered by the mud. So, I mean, this is the state I was in when I got to Europe, when I got to here. This is the mountain, these are the Alps. I worked on a farm for a few weeks in Europe trying to learn some Italian and figure out my way around. And then I got invited to a trip up to the Alps with a bunch of scientists mostly from across the EU. And we spent a few days, about this time of year, in these mountains. Just, you can see here, like there's crosses everywhere because these places have just been inspiring people for thousands of years. And it was pretty wild to be in that kind of a wilderness because here you have places where the mountains and there's you see again like these incredible mountains, but there's houses, old houses that people go to shepherd cows in summer. It's very different from what I experienced in Canada, where it was wilderness where no one had ever been or very few people had ever been. And like I said, it was very recent human impact. These migrations that came back there after the ice went away. To go to a place like this where you had human impact and human sort of manipulation for a long time, yet you still have incredible wilderness.
Is that a stone roof?
Yeah, it's stone, cut stone. It was all stone, except for the front railings of their wood. And we slept in there were donkeys in there too, because it was cold. But we slept above the donkeys. Yeah. And then my 3rd month out, I was living here in this house because there was a snowstorm. We got stuck. And we couldn't get off the mountain. The house is this tiny, tiny little dot.
Yeah.
That's like 4 stories high, though, the house.
Yeah.
It's big. Yeah, it's big. And we got stuck there because it was so windy that if you walked outside, you would get blown this way, which is okay because it's not as steep. But you couldn't, there was a couple of ridges you couldn't cross and you get blown off the cliff. So we stayed there for a few days. And our pasta held out, so we were okay. We were the sort of last without getting blown away. But I hadn't been to the coast yet, which was where I had to be, right? I was in the mountains, and it was awesome. But I hadn't been in the ocean, and I've been farming, which was great. But I still wasn't in the ocean, so I moved to this community called Kyoja. It's right near Venice. It was part of the Venetian Empire at one time, But unlike Venice, it never became